Imagine lending your neighbor money and then realizing he used that same money to buy your house, your car, and maybe even your job. Sounds insane, right? Well, that's exactly what happened between the United States and China. For decades, America has been printing money like Monopoly Night at the Federal Reserve. And China, quietly, patiently, has been collecting that money like a strategic hoarder who knows exactly when the board game ends. But here's the twist. China didn't just save those dollars. They turned them into power, economic, political, and global. While the US was flexing military muscle, China was buying influence, one American dollar at a time. This isn't just a story about trade deficits or treasury bonds. It's a high-stakes financial chess match, and somehow the US ended up playing checkers. Let's rewind to the early 2000s. The US was booming. Everyone was buying houses, SUVs, and plasma TVs like it was a national duty. Most of those shiny Made in China labels, that's where this story begins. Every time Americans bought cheap goods from China, dollars flowed out of the US and into China. But China didn't just stash those dollars under a mattress. Nope. They took those same dollars and lent them right back to the US government by buying US Treasury bonds. So, to put it simply, America was borrowing money from China that America originally spent in China. Mind blown. See, back then, US policymakers thought this was genius. Hey, they said, we get cheap goods, China gets our dollars, and we get to borrow them back at low interest. Win-win. Except it wasn't. Because over time, China built up over $1 trillion worth of US debt. That's like your friend owning the mortgage to your house, your car loan, and your credit card all at once. But it gets better, or worse, depending on your passport. By holding all that debt, China gained a silent lever over the US economy. If they ever wanted to, they could sell those bonds and send shockwaves through global markets. Of course, they never needed to actually do it. The threat was enough. Power without ever firing a shot. If you're hooked so far, imagine what's coming next. Because the real genius move is still ahead. Hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the rest of this wild money story. While America was drowning in debt, China had a secret project. They wanted to make their currency, the yuan, powerful enough to compete with the dollar. But how do you make the world trust your money? Simple. You control the world's factories. China became the global supplier for everything. Electronics, clothing, steel, solar panels, microchips, even the packaging your iPhone comes in. Every transaction pulled the world a little closer to depending on China. Meanwhile, those trillions in US dollars China earned, they didn't just sit still. They were used to buy gold, land, natural resources, and, here's the kicker, American companies. That's right. China took America's money and used it to buy America. Factories, tech firms, real estate in New York and California. Even Hollywood had Chinese investors shaping which movies got funded. It's the ultimate financial plot twist. You spend money, your competitor gets stronger. Now you might think, well, why didn't the US just stop buying from China? Easy, because cheap Chinese goods became essential to the American lifestyle. If you pulled Chinese imports out of Walmart overnight, the store would look like it went through a zombie apocalypse. Prices would skyrocket, inflation would explode, and American companies, they'd be bankrupt before you could say made elsewhere. So America kept buying, kept spending, kept borrowing. China didn't need to defeat the US. The US was doing that all on its own. China just made sure to collect the receipts. Then came 2008, the global financial crisis. America's financial system nearly imploded. But here's what most people missed. While Wall Street was burning, China went shopping. They used their massive US dollar reserves to buy oil fields in Africa, ports in Europe, and mines in South America. When everyone else was panicking, China was expanding. That's not just luck, that's strategy. It's like the US handed China a credit card, maxed it out, and then watched as China used the reward points to buy the world. After 2008, China doubled down with a new master plan, the Belt and Road Initiative, a multi-trillion-dollar project connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe through trade routes, railways, and ports. Think of it as China saying, "Fine, America, you dominate the oceans with your navy. We'll dominate the land with money." Countries desperate for development signed up, taking Chinese loans to build infrastructure. And here's the punchline. Those loans were in US dollars. Yes, China was using American money to build a new world order that didn't rely on America. A move so ironic, it deserves its own spot in the Economic Hall of Fame. Fast forward to today, while the US argues about interest rates in student loans, China is testing its digital yuan, a government-controlled programmable currency. And they're not just testing it in China. They're using it in cross-border trade deals with other nations. If this takes off, it could challenge the US dollar's dominance, the same dominance that gave America global power for 80 years. So, imagine this. America's money built the global system, and now China is rewriting the code that runs it. Let's recap this economic magic trick. China sold cheap goods to America. America paid in dollars. China lent those dollars back to America. America paid interest. China used the profits to buy global influence. And now what? They're building a system where America's own money no longer calls the shots. That's not luck. That's a 40-year plan. A slow, calculated, brilliant strategy executed with the patience of a civilization that's seen empires rise and fall for 5,000 years. If you just realize this isn't a story about China versus America, but a story about how money always wins, you're starting to think like the Money Archive. Subscribe and stick around, because the next story might just change how you see your wallet, your job, and your entire economy. And remember, sometimes the smartest move is the one your opponent doesn't even see coming. Now, if you think this story ends with China standing victorious and America down on its knees, not so fast. Because when it comes to global finance, the US doesn't just play the game, it owns the casino. And just when it seemed like China was about to cash out all its chips, the US pulled a move that only America could pull. It weaponized the dollar. Here's the thing most people forget. The US dollar isn't just money, it's power. Every major international transaction, from oil to iPhones, passes through a US dollar system controlled by American banks. That means even if two countries, say China and Brazil, want to trade without the US, their payments often touch the American network. And that's when the US can say, "Oh, sorry, we don't like your politics. Transaction denied." That's not finance. That's financial warfare. So while China has been building ports and railways, the US has been quietly holding the world's financial oxygen tank, the SWIFT system. Cut that off, and economies suffocate. Ironically, China's biggest weakness is also its biggest weapon. Those $800 billion in US Treasury bonds it still holds. If China sells them too fast, the value drops and China loses money. If they hold them, America just keeps paying low-interest debt. With money it can print infinitely. It's like holding your opponent's IOUs that your opponent can rewrite any time he wants. That's the genius of the dollar. It's not just currency, it's addiction. And the world is hooked. Even China can't escape the dollar completely, at least not yet. So now we're living through a financial Cold War. But instead of nukes, it's interest rates and semiconductors. America's strategy? Cut China off from key technologies, microchips, AI, and advanced machinery. China's countermove? Stockpile gold, reduce dollar reserves, and make the yuan digital. Both sides are trying to untangle decades of codependency, and it's messy. Think of it like a financial divorce after a long, toxic marriage, where both sides still share the same Netflix account. If you want to know who's winning, don't follow the headlines. Follow the gold. Over the past few years, China has been secretly hoarding tons of gold. Literally, it's now one of the largest buyers of gold on the planet. Why? Because gold is the one form of money the US can't sanction, freeze, or delete. It's the ultimate plan B for when the digital and dollar systems go highwire. So while the US defends the dollar, China is quietly building a parallel safety net, one that glitters. Here's where things get even crazier. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement made the US dollar the world's reserve currency. Every country had to keep dollars because dollars were as good as gold. Fast forward to today, China wants to flip that script, not by destroying the dollar, but by bypassing it. Through trade agreements with countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, they're slowly creating a new financial ecosystem. No dollars, no SWIFT, just direct trade, powered by Chinese banks and digital yuan wallets. It's slow, subtle, but it's happening. And for the first time since World War II, the world might actually have a choice.
If this story is making your brain spin faster than the stock market on a Monday, go ahead, subscribe right now. Because we're not done yet. The final twist of this financial thriller is the part nobody talks about. Now, here's what China still doesn't have: trust. See, global finance runs on faith, not factories. And while people may fear the US, they still trust its money. They trust that if they put $1 in a US bank, it won't vanish overnight. Can you say the same about China's system? Not really. China's government controls its economy like a puppeteer, pulling strings, cutting access, censoring data. That's efficient, but it's not trustworthy. And trust is what keeps the dollar alive, even when America's debt hits record highs. So while China may have played a brilliant long game, the US still has one unbeatable card. The world believes in its money. But don't get too comfortable, because the next battle isn't about trade wars or interest rates, it's about digital dominance. Whoever controls the global payment systems of the future, the digital rails for every transaction, wins. And both China and the US know it. China's already testing its digital yuan in Africa and Southeast Asia. The US, meanwhile, is exploring a digital dollar. It's a race to see who builds the new internet of money. And when that system goes live, whoever runs it won't just own the bank. They'll own every transaction on Earth. So, what's the takeaway here? That money isn't just paper or pixels, it's the most powerful weapon ever created. It can build nations, collapse empires, and rewrite history without firing a single bullet. China learned that lesson early. America invented it, and now they're both fighting to see who can wield it better. If you ever thought money was boring, this is your wake-up call. Because every swipe of your card, every loan, every paycheck, it's all part of a global game of control. And here's the craziest part. The real loser in this battle might not be China or the US. It might be you. Why? Because as these giants play tug-of-war with currencies, the value of ordinary people's money, savings, salaries, pensions, gets crushed in the middle. Every time they print, devalue, or manipulate their currencies, you lose buying power. So while governments brag about GDP growth, the average person is left wondering why groceries cost double. That's the quiet tax no one voted for, inflation. And it's the hidden cost of this global financial war. If this story made you see global finance differently, if you realized that money isn't just economics but strategy, then you're exactly the kind of person who belongs here at the Money Archive. Subscribe now, because next time we're uncovering how oil, gold, and the dollar became the secret triangle that decides the fate of nations. And trust me, once you see that connection, you'll never look at your paycheck the same way again. Because in the world of money, no one's rich. They're just temporarily winning.